And finally, this is another little bit of Kabbalistic dissertation. Why would God wish so much pain on his creatures? There are many views on this aspect of divine will. Some scholars suggest creation is the handiwork of a celestial sadistic child who delights in pulling the wings off butterflies and babies off their mothers' chests. Soon, they surmise, God's mother will come into the room and smack him, thus ending all our suffering. Others teach that God comes from a parallel universe where manure is the most precious commodity. Our enterprising God created this universe to produce enough manure to make him wealthy in his dimension. The only shortcoming of this view is that it's hard to imagine anyone needing such staggering amounts of manure as our world is producing, casting aspersions on any entity who desires even more of it. Otherwise, this view has predominated in our civilization, finding its most profound expression in human television. Other traditions describe God as the lazy dreamer for whom reality is but an afternoon nap. Soon he'll wake up to take his tea and biscuits by the living room bay window, then recline and dream the same dream again, and so on. According to the Kabbalist Handbook of Practical Messianic Redemption, the real purpose of creation had nothing to do with mankind. Instead, creation was conceived as a way for God to shake off his ambivalence about the quality of judgment in him. In other words, like most of us, God was only too happy to be the cosmic Mr. Nice Guy, but he wasn't quite sure what to do with the harsher aspects of being the limitless divine. So he made a universe in which his nice guy attributes would be limited by his Mr. Tough Guy persona. A later version of the Kabbalist Handbook's account of creation, which most researchers associate with early 19th century notions of classicism, if not outright paganism, goes something like this. One day, a meaningless expression since this vignette is supposed to have taken place before time was created, God became aware that there was something wrong with his perception of himself as a wholesome, righteous, and kindly giving entity. It turned out there were forces lurking within him which were neither noble nor delightful. As was his custom, before he learned better, God appointed a fact-finding commission that was composed of himself. The commission issued a report which upset God very much. It turned out that his worst suspicions were true, and he was regrettably a much more complex, all-encompassing entity than even he had cared to imagine. This matter had to be dealt with forthrightly, and so God decided to take himself to court, where he accused himself of the highest possible crime of treason against God. The judge, God, found the defendant God guilty as charged and sentenced himself to billions upon billions of years of hard labor in a specially created environment inside which he would not be filling up the entire space as he normally did. In that miraculous place, God would no longer be an uninterrupted blasting of goodness and light. Shackles would be placed on him, shackles expressed through something never before experienced by God. That new phenomenon would be named darkness, and it would define God the way a contour line defines an object. Now the Kabbalist Handbook is getting to the exciting part. In preparation for his prison sentence, God decided to trick himself by baking the ultimate hacksaw cake. That was the spirit of the Messiah, the unpredictable element which God imbued with the power to put a stop to his own shenanigans. This fail-safe measure was needed in case God's presence in the world was so diminished he might not remember how to stop the universe from degenerating. A much later passage is inserted here to illustrate the above point. Like the time around 1941 when nobody knew where God had gone and all the angels were becoming so worried, and behind the holy screen a voice was breaking out every night, and our matriarch Rachel was crying over her slaughtered children. Who can forget those days when the universe was altered? The guide continues, but each time things seemed so terrible and the planet was going Auschwitz, and it looked like God might decide at last to break out of his self-imposed prison cell, he was overcome by regrets. Imagine that. Millions of the very men, women, and children who believed he was the nicest supernatural entity that ever existed were being marched into small enclosures where little pellets were dropped in their midst, emitting a poison that soon made them stop breathing. Yet even that rising mountain of dead bodies didn't seem terrible enough for him to come to his senses and stop history. It may be hard to believe, but over the years since creation, God has become quite the sentimentalist. He likes his prison cell. He is infatuated with his fellow inmates, all creatures of his divine imagination. He enjoys the small jobs he is ordered to do around the facility. He likes the head counts and the lockups, the unannounced cell searches, the sudden eruption of brawls in the mess hall, the smuggled contraband, the aimless hour he spends each day out in the open-air courtyard. Put a stop to his own sentence, why he doesn't even bother showing up for his parole hearings.